A good evening to you and welcome to the show that puts context to content in a way that is independent, free and with no holds barred. This is News Sources, Ladies Edition. I am Julie Masiga.
Is entitled to her opinion. Tonight, as always, we welcome your views on our subjects of discussion as we focus tonight on electoral reforms in the country. I'm Sharon Momani. Welcome to the program.
Let's take a quick look now at the highlights of the show.
Commissioners are only 8 and the chairman. There are very few, and the council is bigger than all of us.
Ideally, the Electoral Commission should be in place 24 months before the election. Now, we don't have 24 months.
Nilimuona hivi, nikamuuliza Ngila, unataka kuniua peke yako?
Now let's begin with the big news of the day. And after weeks of hardline negotiations, IEBC commissioners have formally agreed to leave office, but only under a negotiated settlement. The commission's chairman, Isaac Hassan, say they want a dignified exit from office. However, they want the staff at the commission retained. Is this a start to a solution on the IEBC standoff?
The chairman, there are very few, and the council is bigger than all of us.
We have served the country with great honor, and we appreciate the leadership this committee has shown in the process.
Allow me to thank you most sincerely for sacrificing for this country so that we can have a peaceful, free and fair elections.
Right, and let's begin. I'd like to invite and, of course, to introduce our guests tonight. On my immediate left is Wangui Mbatia Nyauma, who is a policy consultant. Thank you so much for joining us yet again. And at the middle there, we have Jerry Thorne, who is a political commentator. Always a pleasure to have you, and Jerry. And let's just begin this discussion. This is what a lot of people have been agitating for the commissioners to exit office. And finally, they have decided to do that voluntarily. What do you read into that, and what do you make of that, actually, Wangui?
First, I'll say it is very important that for the first time, people are beginning to think of the country ahead of their own interests, because we've had this for a very long time, and we should have been thinking along these lines. Now that they're resigning, there are several things that need to be dealt with, and very fast. One is for us to have a roadmap about how it is that we're going to handle our elections, because we have a very limited time. Whether we think about extending or whether we do not, we have to think very quickly about how we want to handle this exit. And as we are doing it, hopefully we think in terms of posterity. How will we in the future handle a situation such as this if it ever comes? Secondly, it is very important that whatever deals that are being negotiated do not deny or rob the country an opportunity to correct what needs to be corrected, so this doesn't happen again and again and again. So that let the process of making a deal not end up being a cover-up of wrongs that have been done. Because if we get an idea of what's happening and what went wrong, maybe we will have an opportunity to correct it so that we don't have to go through this again and again.
Right. And Jerry, your thoughts on this? Is this a start to a solution, the vacation of office?
Yeah, I think it's a big step. It's a very bold step. A lot of it, of course, is based on public opinion. There haven't been the tribunals that should have happened as per the Constitution. So public opinion is what has driven this. But once trust and confidence levels at such a low, given the sensitive nature of their job and the sort of sensitive nature of our elections, I think it's a good thing what they've done, as Wangui said, putting the country before themselves. But we also have to remember that they're not necessarily guilty of anything. They were going with public opinion. It was important because of their levels of trust and confidence.
Yeah,
Right.
well, being in public office, of course, there's a higher standard required of people who are serving the public. We expect them to be better than us in a sense. So the matters of integrity possibly pushed them out more than any actual crime that was proven against them. But then the thing that is interesting is that they've asked for a dignified exit and a dignified pay packet. And this entire process has been nothing like dignified.
Yeah, and in fact, there's some people who are asking and questioning the timing of this. I mean, the opposition started agitating, particularly against or rather for the exit of these commissioners for office with this Monday, demonstrations. And some people are asking, why now? We've had people die, we've had properties destroyed. Why now? This is a decision that, if you indeed are talking about living with dignity, should have been made weeks
much earlier on. Yes.
What do you think about this?
I think they felt they were unduly sort of pushed out of office. Otherwise, they would have left immediately. I think when they say dignity, it's that because we're now leaving, let's do this the proper way. When you say why now, I would say the court campaign was successful, but we have to bear in mind that this was trial by media, it was trial by public perception. There is nothing they are guilty of, but they have been, outstanding citizens, and they've said, well, if it's affecting the levels of trust and confidence, which could affect our election process, which could lead to very tense situations in the country, we're better off stepping down.
But Wangui,
if you keep handling our officials this way, I think in the future it will become very, very difficult for Kenyans of goodwill to actually vie for positions to serve us. It is very, very unfair for somebody who has given their time and perhaps even sacrificed their career so that they can get into public service to be pushed out in the manner that they have. To a great extent, I feel very, very sorry that some of those commissioners who haven't been named in any scandal are having to live under these circumstances, because you see, the point is that they will live, whether we like it or not, we are sort of giving them a disgraceful, dishonorable exit. And some of them do not really deserve it, and some of them are fairly young. I mean, there are people whose careers will forever be marked by this exit. And it's going to be very, very difficult in the future, considering the way we've sort of ushered out some of our very, very talented people. It might become very difficult for people to apply for positions in public service. People might start getting shy. That's a danger we are running. Secondly, we do have a constitution that guarantees certain rights. Once we start dispensing of certain rights in relation to a certain class or category of citizens, because there has been a media outcry or there's a public outcry, when we start doing away with the right to a fair trial, with the right to a presumption of innocence, which we extended gracefully to the president and the deputy president, when we do away with those kinds of fundamental freedoms and rights, it becomes very, very dangerous for the rest of us. So we are sort of caught between a rock and a hard place. We as a country do need to fix this problem, because clearly there is now a credibility issue that it might have been very difficult for them to handle our elections credibly, particularly if they would have been contested. But at the same time, we are really pretty much stepping on people's toes.
But how do you separate the forest from the trees? How do you determine who's guilty and who's not guilty when all of them have been painted with that kind of brush of corruption? And if you're in public office, don't we require more of you, such that if your credibility is called into question in any way, then you should do the honorable thing and just say, then I think that
I think if you're in public office, your credibility, the threshold for your credibility is much higher.
Yes.
And of course, you're a target for whatever reason, whether it's political or not. So in terms of credibility, I think they haven't been proved to be not credible, so to speak. This
but
word
aspersions have been cast, yes.
Public perception is crucial here. And because there's the overarching goal of ensuring peaceful elections, they have had to step aside. So what they've done is to be lauded, but we can't sit and, as she says, ignore, the rule of law, these are fundamental rights, right to a fair trial. There's nothing they have done wrong as things stand. But because there's an overarching principle of ensuring that, we believe in our elections, they've had to step aside.
Maybe what we should do away with is deal cutting.
Right.
Yes,
hold that
thought. I want to hear about the deal cutting, though.
These deals that are being cut, not to extend certain immunities.
Political agreements.
Hold your thoughts, ladies, please. As part of their negotiated settlement, the IEBC officials want immunity from prosecution for crimes of omission or commission while serving at the IEBC. Who should take responsibility for the mess at the helm of the commission, which I believe is what we have been discussing now. Which one among them is guilty? Who's guilty and who's not guilty?
The way you phrased it, the mess at the helm, is still very assumptive. Remember, this is just public opinion.
But
we haven't gone through a trial.
Public opinion or not, it is a huge mess that has captured this country.
Primarily the media.
But is it really
trial by media?
I mean, we are dealing with chicken gate. We are dealing with
actual accusations.
Malpractices, BVR kits. Allegations
in the media, you throw out words like chicken gate. Chicken gate is about transactions that happened during the IEBC. the Interim Independent Electoral
Which
Commission.
involved some commissioners who are serving in the IEBC.
It did involve some of them, but it did name some of the commissioners. Some of them weren't even in office then. But let's set that aside. My issue with them is when you start asking for immunity, to a certain extent, you're almost admitting guilt.
Yeah, exactly.
You see, for me, now, that again now, whereas I want them to be given a fair process, the fact that amongst the things that they're asking for is not that this process be properly interrogated and whatever it is that is going on be openly discussed and the public and the nation know what went wrong. They're not asking for space to clear their names. They're asking for immunity. That
they're saying don't come after us.
That in and of itself sort of casts a cloud over them. Although again, as at a personal level, I can understand a person just simply not wanting to go through that kind of trial before. Just want it to be over with.
Yeah. So Njeri, like Wangoi has said, once you say I want immunity and you have consistently
the presumption is there must be a reason you're looking for that.
But you've maintained that you're innocent,
that is the
so immunity from
what? We
what?
also have to remember that now they're not in the offices they had. They don't have maybe the protections, the structures behind them that they would have had. So they'll be hit with lawsuits maybe they can't afford. There's a number of reasons. Maybe they're targets, maybe there's personal attacks. And as you say, maybe they just want out of it. They don't want to be involved in it anymore.
But the fundamental question is, those people who are trying to give immunity, have they got any power under the Constitution to offer it actually?
This is another question because the Select Committee, which has members from both CORD and Jubilee, is actually handling their exit package.
How would a legislature be body? Those are people who are drawn from the legislature. Immunity is a judicial process. How would they even come down to offering a pre-bargain?
And perhaps because they're meant to handle, do you imagine that it's going to be an arbitration process and that this has come out during their mandate of just resolving this issue? You imagine that whoever is then tasked with this process comes in.
And who exactly is being given immunity? Perhaps
is it all of them? That's all I'm saying. How do you separate the forest from the trees?
Perhaps even the deal is being cut between the legislators. I mean, whose election was it? It was for those people sitting cutting that deal. So perhaps some of the things that would have come up if we would have interrogated them further would have been maybe improprieties that were done and committed during elections, and that would have had a direct effect on the legislators. So to a certain extent, there is a little bit of conflict of interest. I don't think anywhere in our Constitution we have given our members of Parliament or whatever, because even this is a commission that is really outside the Constitution,
outside of
the power to negotiate away our right to have and conduct proper processes. However, again, we are a nation.
And yet we sit here and these things are happening, because I maintained from the beginning that this Select Commission is kind of outside of the law. And yet Hassan also said in his comments there that allow the political process to go ahead and we'll step out of the way. So have they kind of just said, let the politicians run this show? For whatever reason,
I think it's still at the negotiation stages, so we're being a bit presumptive to assume that this is exactly what's going to happen. I like her point in that who has these the authority to grant immunity.
And look at the people sitting in the panel. A good number of them are accused persons. If they start dishing out immunity, for heaven's sake.
And they might as well dish it out for themselves.
Some of them were in Pangani last time I checked.
Right, and some of the important issues that has come out of this is the question of making these rules and just subjecting these people to the court of public opinion. And I don't know, can we draw parallels this to what is happening to the EACC, at the moment with Kinisu perhaps? And this has actually happened for, historically at the EACC in Jerry.
I think the EACC it faces a lot of trouble from sort of everywhere. If they investigate somebody, that person will fight back. Corruption fights back, so they'll fight back. If they're not investigating, then they're not doing their job. With the Kinisu issue, I mean, the media sort of was very mischievous in how it handled the whole thing. Kinisu is involved and presides over investigations to do with the NYS. If he has been implicated, and he has said that he has a firm that received money from the NYS, clearly there's a conflict of interest. Of course, the media then went on to try and divert attention from this, and they brought up the Deputy CEO, Mubea, having received I think 50.4 million from the NYS themselves.
Is that diverting attention or just reporting?
It was diverting attention because if you look at the facts of the case, basically, yes, money was received by a firm that Mubea used to work for back in January 2013.
All right,
these firms have a lot of dealings. It wasn't Mubea's money.
We're going to have to pursue that conversation at some point as we sharpen our conversation now. And a few days ago, the Attorney General, Gideon Muigai, told the Joint House Committee that if the current IEBC team is sent home, it would require up to 24 months to train new officials in readiness for the 2017 general election. The AG's assessment, this would mean that the next general election slated for August 2017 would have to be postponed until mid-2018, consequently extending President Uhuru Kenyatta's term in office. Is the country ready for this?
Ideally, the Electoral Commission should be in place 24 months before the election. Now, we don't have 24 months. If we have a new Electoral Commission after say within the next 90 days, we will have reduced the period of preparation to 9 months, I think. Now, it is up to you, Mr. Chairman and members, to cogitate over this issue and determine whether that is sufficient time.
Right, so that is what the Attorney General said a few days ago, just stating that, you know, this would possibly lead to a delay up to 2018. Are we prepared for this kind of delays, or actually what overarching, you know, results of this ongoing deliberations?
I think two things are going on here that I want to point out. Maybe I go back to our history. I think the Attorney General is deliberately refusing to look at our history and say that we've done elections under tighter conditions. Let me take, for instance, the referendum that was conducted by the Interim Independent Electoral Commission. It was organized at a time when we had to register our voters afresh after the CRIES Commission. We had to set up the Interim Independent Electoral Commission, and we then were able to proceed and have the referendum in pretty much very quick order. Similarly, the elections of 2013 were actually much tougher than we will face now, because in 2013 we were coming out of a referendum where we had actually awarded ourselves a new constitution.
Right.
So not only were we reconstituting afresh our institutions, we had to make those institutions stand, staff them, register voters, buy new voting equipment that we had not been accustomed to, educate our voters and conduct elections. And we were able to do that from August 2010, and we had held elections in 2013. I mean, doing all that in that short period of time of just about 24 months, I think with goodwill and understanding that our country does not need to be stretched to where we start operating without understood parameters. I think we can do better. If they were coming back and saying, we've tried to make a plan of action on how we can do this, and we are finding it difficult to accommodate this and this activity within this and this period, as a nation, as a citizen, I would be willing to listen. But right off the bat saying, ideally, I want to know whose ideals these are, because we've held elections under tighter conditions. And
so in your assessment, this can still be possible to go with the calendar as is?
I think it's rash, and I think it is sad that it is coming from the Attorney General, because really he should be the government's legal advisor. He should be the person who tells the government that this is what the Constitution says. And one of the things the Constitution says is very clearly that we must have elections on the second Tuesday of August, the 5th year after elections. Now count that. I mean, it's very simple. If we are going to have to change that, the government advisor should give us a little more fundamental reason than just saying ideally.
But is it rash, or is it slightly calculated? Could that have been the end game, this whole IEBC mess, as we called it ahead earlier, to kind of extend people's terms in office for whatever reason?
Which is why I said in the beginning, these deals that are being cut.
I think it's a case. I think there's a case of having your cake and eating it. That's what we want. We want a credible, well-constituted, well-reconstituted IEBC that is able to do its job, that has trust and confidence from the electorate. But then we also want everything to happen in a short space of time.
But
So we've talked about learning
before.
from the past and making sure we reconstitute a commission that can be trusted to carry out our elections or to monitor our elections. Yet at the same time, when we're being told it might take long, these might be the hurdles, there might be some bottlenecks, we're saying, no, we don't want that. So we've got to decide. You can't have your cake and eat it. I agree with what he says to a certain extent, and it is early, you know, when he says ideally, he will break down what needs to be done.
Why
but he is
24 months?
Experienced. Well, you said
Jerry, why 24 months? Why not 30 months?
Okay, hold on. You talked
Because
about,
he's
first of
already
all,
made
between 2010 and 2013 was 3 years, huh? That was 36 months.
No,
so
it
when
was
you look
August
at history,
2010. It was August 2010 and March. I
okay,
mean, it was
so
barely 3
years.
years.
Okay, so it was 33 months. Yeah, so if you're going to base it on history that we've done it in the past, it took us 33 months then. Yes?
You know, Jerry, what my problem is the ability of a person to go and talk to a country, just like the opposition went and said, look, elections cannot be credibly held under the new, the current IEBC. The ability to go and issue a firm statement without giving us background to it, that is what is...
Well, he's given some background in that he's gone as far as saying that it's going to take months to train new officials in readiness for the general elections. And that's his assessment. This is somebody that is well experienced. He knows exactly what he's talking about. We can't say that they're just wild assertions. And at the moment, it's just a discussion at this stage, and it needs to be had. Are we going to have reconstituted a trusted and credible IEBC by the time the elections are coming?
Is then how did he arrive at the 24 months?
We're not
because
25.
we're questioning what informed that. You know,
okay, I think we could get in touch with him and ask him that.
Right.
I don't know exactly how he said that, but it's good for us to anticipate a delay. There's a lot of changes that are going on, and I keep saying you can't have your cake and eat it. You can't say the IEBC is not credible. Then when you're told, can we have a bit more time, you say we don't want to do that.
The other thing we want to ask is exactly who's going home. If it is the commission, I mean, those are it's a handful of people. I mean, Jerry, who are these officials we constantly have to retrain? Where are we getting them from? If it is returning officers, they've had experience.
Let's hold that thought and we'll continue with that. Right now, we want to engage our viewers by taking the Twitter poll tonight, and we ask you, should the IEBC be given blanket immunity as they leave office? Our Twitter poll tonight, again, we're asking you, should the IEBC be given blanket immunity as they leave office? Do tweet us at KTN News, at Julie Masiga, at Sharon_Momanyi to share your views on this. Right, let's continue with our discussion tonight. And Julie?
According to the Auditor General, wasted funds amounting to 14.4 billion on projects which did not result. The government has wasted funds amounting to 14.4 billion shillings on projects which did not result in value for money. In his 2014-2015 report, Edward Ouko highlights various instances in which the government sunk billions of shillings into projects which had little benefit to the taxpayer. Where are our checks and balances? Big question, where are our checks and balances? Because State House is a place where we don't really seem to question or try and audit what happens and how the monies are being spent. Now the Auditor General comes out to say that billions of shillings are being wasted on projects that are started and stopped and changed, and money keeps being poured into these projects. And they're not in the public interest. I believe he said something like building a petrol station, then changing their minds and trying to build a set of offices and paying contractors millions and millions of shillings. So who is empowered in this scenario to actually go into the books and see where our monies are being spent in State House? Wangui, I think I'll start with you.
I think I'll start with maybe questioning the processes through which we procure. Do we have a plan in action before we even set aside monies to be spent? Because if we have a plan and we decide that there is a petrol station that is planned for a particular area, then changing that plan around and deciding and determining to do something else should be informed by some kind of planning decision. That's one thing. The other thing is I am not very sure that I want to deal with these statements again piecemeal. All these statements have background. I don't think State House really does its own planning, one. they don't do procurement. I mean, procurement lies somewhere. There is a whole parliamentary accounts committee that should be able to interrogate all this. We do have a treasury that before it releases funds should be able to ensure that everything is in order. Sometimes, you know, we keep directing all our problems towards State House as though all our evil comes from State House and all our fixes will come from State House. I think it is time that people familiarized themselves with how projects are commissioned in the country, how procurement is done, and how decisions are made. I mean, sometimes really it is not possible for a worker in State House to interfere. We did say we don't want them to interfere with procurement decisions.
Well, I think I will disagree with you a bit, because we're not focusing on State House. We're actually focusing on the Auditor General's report about State House in this particular instance. We're not blaming them for all the problems.
You know, when you say State House, the average Kenyan hears the president.
Okay, I will differentiate. I'm talking about President Uhuru Kenyatta. I'm talking about the Office of State House and the people who work there and manage their finances. It seems, reading the Auditor General's report, it seems that they kind of spend money willy-nilly. They start a project, it doesn't work, we'll just start another one, we'll change this one. It seems like money flows to State House pretty easily, which is...
I think also we have to understand that the Auditor General's report, those are queries as well.
Yes.
We still don't have evidence. What he does is he has the report,
yes,
and then he sends them to those concerned, the different ministries and the different services, public bodies, and they have time to then respond and actually accounts for
I think
the
he actually
monies
does
and so
audit
on.
their accounts.
Now, what
and
then
figures out
tends
that
to
money
happen
is
the media picks up on these queries and actually publicizes them as shortcomings. And when they're actually resolved, the media doesn't go back and say, actually, this query, what had happened is there was a delay in filing X, Y, Z. So the people are left feeling that actually these ministries or these projects aren't working out. The auditor's report, it's a query, and the media picks it up, amplifies it.
When he states that billions
public bodies
of shillings have been misspent, is that a query?
You've got to...
Ordinarily, what the Auditor General does, he will go into a department or a ministry or an agency, and he will be given the papers that the support whatever expenditure there is. Now, all those expenditures are supposed to be supported by documents that sort of justify the allocation and the expenditures. Sometimes those documents do arrive at the Auditor General's office without the supporting documents, or with documents that are unclear, so that the Auditor General raises a query and requires the relevant office to make clarification. And that is what Njeri is talking about. The media then picks up on those queries raised and then reports to the public as though the Auditor General has actually indicated that there is a problem, there is monies lost, or there is wastage of funds. 99% of the time, it is merely a query. He's asking, look, I got this information from you, I got these documents from you. This is not clear. It is not clear to me why vote number 1 is saying it is going to a petrol station, whereas the report of the completed project indicates its offices. Can you please clarify? Then that is picked up by the media, and then
realizing that we are the media,
and they sensationalize it. But the worst thing is, the media doesn't then come back when things have been clarified and give it the same column inches as they do when there's actually a query. And most people don't understand. So when there's a query, they think, okay, our money is being badly spent.
When the counties were being audited, I believe the media did a thorough job of following the money trail, publishing the auditor's report and going back and asking, have you provided these supporting documents to prove that you spent the money in the way that you said it did? But what came out was that everybody was saying, oh, the documents are late, or they are still in our possession, we haven't sent them to the offices, yet they are aware that the auditor is coming to audit them at a particular point in time.
There will be delays.
So people should be ready to audit it.
Sometimes the delay is not with the reporting office. Sometimes the reporting office hasn't received from the people holding the documents.
It's an easy defense to say that for some reason I couldn't give you the documents.
No, I think the main thing and what you take away from this is that the auditor's report is a query. And the media needs to understand that. They're misinforming the public when they come back to them and say X amount of money is missing from this ministry.
I believe in this particular report, he did say that they had planned to do one thing and then they changed their minds and did another thing and ended up spending almost double the money
and
because
maybe
of that change.
And maybe there are documents to support why that happened.
Right, the buzzer there telling us that we need to move on to the next subject of discussion. Very interesting indeed. And we're reminding you of our Twitter poll tonight, and we're asking you, should the IEBC commissioners be given blanket immunity as they leave office? Should the IEBC commissioners be given blanket immunity as they leave office? Do tweet us at KTN News, at Sharon_Momanyi, at Julie Masiga. And right now we want to take a short break. Don't go too far, more to discuss after that.
Welcome back. The Ipsos Synovet polls released yesterday have become a victim of critique mainly regarding methodology, questions asked and populations targeted for the polls. The other major polling group in the country is Infotrack, whose March polls indicating that President Kenyatta's popularity then was at 45% against that of Raila's 28% was just equally criticized. Is there truth to allegations of bias or just sore losers?
We know from the last elections that the support from both CORD and Jubilee was more or less the same. In fact, the election was very close to call. So already this sample, as much as it is said that it was a proportionate sample, did not have the accurate representation from the various groups, and that causes a lot of concern.
Well, the last time, I think the previous poll that they had done said that a certain percentage of Kenyans thought the country was going in the wrong direction, and yet a similar number, perhaps more, thought that we still had the right leadership. And I think one of the bones of contention is the question they keep asking, should Raila Odinga resign from active politics? And is that a fair question to ask, and is it relevant?
Is it an unfair question to ask?
Of what relevance is it?
The fact that he's aged and the majority of the population is youth, and maybe
I believe Kibaki served when he was of a similar
yeah, so there's no harm
age.
in asking the question.
And he doesn't hold an office.
You're
so he
allowed
cannot
to ask
resign.
any
he
question.
can decide to be in active politics for as long as he likes.
He's the leader of the opposition.
The critics are asking then, why Raila? Why? It's like the question is as if it's leading towards.
Yes.
I think it is in the public discourse in terms of as a conversation. It is being had.
Right.
So I don't think they were being particularly leading or sort of
well,
misguiding
they do
people.
decide the questions to ask.
They do. No, but you can actually, Synovet have questions, and you can throw in a question, do people like me? As yourself.
Exactly.
And you pay for that. So whoever's complaining about
my point exactly, I could run a
the
poll
results
on
can
YouTube.
actually run their own polls. And I think it's a pertinent question, especially because of what's going on for the sake of the opposition. They themselves are squabbling within. And also, maybe people are wearing out. Since 1982, he's been
focusing
for
on the
leadership
polls.
here.
For
So
example,
I think it's a valid
Jerry,
question.
if I decided to run a poll on weaves versus dreadlocks,
Why
people
not?
would give me answers.
Why not?
So it depends on the question that
the
you're
way
asking
the question
and
is
why
framed.
you're asking it.
But I
and
think
if you're
with this
asking any
particular
further
question,
questions.
it has been cause for concern within CORD. In fact, I would assume it's CORD that commissioned that poll.
Actually, Tom Wolf was here last night for a show, The Last Word, and his comments on the same was that this particular question on should Raila, resign is something that was fronted by a particular media house asking this question, and that there was an outpouring of feedback on the same.
It's a matter of public interest,
that
national
they
interest.
need to ask. Is this a matter of public interest, Wangoi?
Absolutely.
Why?
He's hoping to run for president. It's as public interest as it gets.
I'm maintaining deliberately a studious silence.
Wondering
why? Because I don't believe that you guys are serious. I mean, this is an opinion poll. I mean, I don't think that there's an area that we ought to just hold on. Sharon, relax. I don't think that there is any subject. I don't think that there is any subject in which Kenyans ought to be denied the right to air an opinion. That is one thing. That is one response to those who are asking why is Raila's candidature for the future being discussed. But at the same time, I also, in terms of the influence of the results with in terms of shaping the political outlay there,
there. I can understand why anybody who is in a party that supports Raila Odinga would be sort of unhappy about that constant question, question being constantly asked, because it does shape opinion. But then I will also remind people, I mean, in the age where surely Brexit was, I mean, all opinion polls were wrong on Brexit, and Donald Trump is running to be a presidential candidate in a country where they do polls every day. Surely opinion polls are something. By the time we are in 2017,
so opinion is
we might have changed.
So
it's an opinion. It's like a head. Everybody's got one.
Let's move on. And 27-year-old Jacqueline Mwenda, the victim of a brutal attack by her husband, during which she lost both arms and was permanently disfigured. She has been promised a monthly stipend of 30,000 shillings per month by Machakos County government. But what more can we do to protect women from gender-based violence? Of course, ladies, you saw what happened to this woman slightly earlier in the week, I believe.
Can we deport the husband to the Congo?
Yeah, very good question.
To the Congo?
The Congo forest.
Yeah, the last time somebody was a woman, we deported them to the Congo.
Maybe. But it's really a heart-wrenching,
very sad
really scenario.
It is very sad. I mean, that a man would go to that length and that a woman was left that vulnerable, because this seems to be a woman actually and a man who are struggling through a marital problem together and seem to have had very little in terms of negotiating their way around a problem they had. Clearly they had a problem having a child, and they were having disputes, and she said, for instance, that her pastor told her to stay on. So it seems to be maybe we need to do more to address the problem, and maybe not to offer. When I said maybe we should deport him to the Congo, that was sarcastic, because we seem to constantly offer very simplistic solutions to domestic violence. Let me say, for instance, the problem they're having about infertility. If we had proper running health facilities that address those kind of problems, maybe this problem could have been arrested earlier.
She said that she actually said that
she did, yes, and they did find out that the husband had a problem. Yes, indeed, and perhaps, like, if you, I don't know whether any of you has followed. I read in the papers today that the cost of healthcare has been raised officially by the Kenya Medical and Dental Practitioners Board, so that right now something that was 3,400 at Pumwani before the government took it over is now 36,000. But we're not talking about that. So whereas it is possible that
address that issue, she was speaking at the UN for something, but we hope that there will be actually
I mean, it is
steps to
the disconnect between our viewing of a case like this and the other information we are receiving as Kenyans is what worries me. Because I read from Mwenda's situation, and I could see so many problems that it highlights. For instance, she's going home to her mother and father who are aging. Now they're going to receive a disabled child back who was self-sufficient, who was running her own business. And what does the Machakos government run to do? It goes and gives her 30,000 shillings stipend. Now, question for me, I would start asking immediately, for how long? Will it be a lifelong arrangement?
It's actually a year.
Secondly, I want to know as a taxpayer, under what provision is this money being dispensed just like that?
Because again, with this one is that we need somebody to do something.
We need to do something, but knee-jerk reactions.
No, somebody needed to do something now, because this woman was in need. Yes, absolutely. So I'm finding it hard to fault the Machakos government.
I'm not faulting the Machakos government.
With one individual. There's principles and the root causes with which you have to deal with. But I don't like the way we're politicizing this issue. This is more a social issue, I think. The fact that we accept violence against women or domestic violence. I can see the political sort of, or the policy aspect of it in terms of making sure we have the right medical facilities.
Simple thing, shelters.
She could have been beaten. Exactly.
Shelters. So if the Machakos County government says 30,000 and a shelter.
I mean,
education.
She herself was advised by her pastor to stay, and she did stay because she wanted to save her marriage. So
and I think it's a social stigma of being divorced. Those are the things we actually need to look at.
Her parents sent her back home.
The idea that there was a bride price. I don't blame the pastor in any way. I think he didn't have the intricate details of exactly what was going on, and it's only natural to try and keep people together being in that position. I think in terms of what he's done, there's a lot of domestic violence going on. It's acceptable here, and the only reason this has come to the forefront was because of the extent of it. It was really gruesome. Her hands were chopped off. I'm a little wary of this idea idea of the 30,000 a month because it doesn't deal with the root cause. If he was to put 30,000 to shelters where people can run away to.
But how many women would go to shelters is the point.
But the worst thing is, you can actually, believe it or not, some things have really bad sort of unintended consequences. People could chop off their arms to get this 30,000. You have to be very careful when you,
That's true,
when you do these things.
Hold that thought, and from one woman to another one. Businesswoman and avid political figure Esther Passaris has in the past few days publicly claimed that celebrated Equity Bank CEO James Mwangi sexually harassed her. Now, Mwangi is yet to comment on the matter, but a mixed reaction has ensued from the public. Some are alleging that Passaris is on a blackmail trail. Should there be worry about the society's reluctance to probe deeper? Should there be worry? Because every time a woman comes out and says she's a victim, the knee-jerk reaction is for people to
where were you making your deals?
There's the right avenues and channels. She's got access to the law. She's not in shackles.
What is wrong about publishing something on Twitter? That's well within her right.
No, she can do that, but has she actually reported this? And let's understand what harassment is. Yes? We need to look at that, because for the first time it's coming to the forefront. It's something that's quite acceptable, but it's got such a vast sort of interpretation. In some countries, even staring longingly at somebody can be considered harassment. But I think what she needs to prove is that there were sexual advances. She needs to prove that they were unwanted, and that James Mwangi was aware. No, hold on. James Mwangi was aware that there were unwanted sexual advances, and then she needs to go further and prove that there's a causal link between her business deal going sour and her refusal of these sexual advances. But when you just put something out there, it's again trial by media.
Right.
There are channels for this, and for somebody of her caliber, her stature, you've put here she's an avid political figure. She's got access to the law. She's got access to the court.
That's a good.
So I don't know what she's doing,
argument,
to be honest.
But let's just step back for a moment and look at the kind of reactions we have received now that she put it out there in public, and everyone just taking that, assumption that she is, because it is just that she is trying to frame this, and not
everyone. She's got a lot of support on Twitter.
Right.
She's got a lot of support. I personally don't support her, which is quite sort of counterintuitive given I'm a woman. But I also have sons. I would hate for my sons where an accusation is thrown at them and they're guilty.
But
there are proper systems and processes in place for these things. And you need to do that. She's a public figure accusing another public figure or a well-known figure.
They're both public figures, so it makes sense that they'll solve.
No, they can resolve these things in court. There are ways and mechanisms for doing this.
Your comments on this?
What are your thoughts on this?
Like I said, it's getting harder and harder to be brilliant and to excel in this country. Because the moment you do, there will be a trial on media, on facts that are flimsy. In my view, I always take great exception to those that will give half a story in secret. They will go on a deal in secret, and if it falls apart, they will come out screaming in public. I'm very keen, and I'm quite keen to find out when she aired that Twitter that she's going for meetings with James Mwangi with a view to securing a deal for equity under the table. If there was a Twitter to that effect, I'll support the Twitter that comes back saying that the deal fell through because he asked me for this and that. Because listen, it could go both ways.
It could,
be the devil's advocate for a
Nothing
moment.
Is proven.
Maybe she did ask for a loan.
Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. But
as people will, sometimes in very, outside the office settings, people might just look, I have a project I'm thinking about, and you or Mr. Mwangi, would you kindly put in a word for me, or can I come see you? That happens in the social setting.
Right.
But maybe she did go a step further, and maybe she did get rebuffed. It's not always, listen, sexual harassment is a real serious thing. Indeed, and I remember last time when Kofi Olomide kicked a woman, I was very sad that we reduced it purely to just domestic violence. Because here was an employer kicking an employee who's a woman. That is as harassment as it gets. And then we take this small tweet and we want to run with sexual harassment.
And I don't know if you saw the tweet. It was an afterthought. So she was talking about capping bank rates and
I think the final word would be
also the sexual harassment.
The final word
this
would
is a serious. It's
Jerry.
I would say stop negotiating.
We have to move to
start negotiating your deals with your women. Start negotiating your deals in the open in offices.
Final word: victim should be protected at all costs. She could be a victim, so we shouldn't.
So is James Mwangi. He could be a victim.
He could also be a victim.
Of defamation.
Should be protected at all costs.
He has not spoken yet, but Sharon
we
has
have to move to the last subject
defend.
of discussion, Jerry, for the night. And Donald Trump is claiming that the U.S. elections are going to be rigged. His comments on Monday came as he decried former Democrat contender Bernie Sanders for endorsing Hillary Clinton in the primary. Even as some Sanders supporters resisted the move, Trump suggested to his supporters that the outcome of the election is out of the hands of voters. Tonight we ask, is rigging a global evil? That's just the question that we have to take on just 30 seconds each, because we have only 1 minute to comment on this. What is your take on the same, Wangoi?
I think you're asking the wrong question. I think the question you're asking is, should every potential election, does every potential election loser think elections will be rigged?
That's a fair point.
Donald Trump has come so far. If he wins, it would surprise everybody, but it's a possibility.
It seems that when a person starts feeling that they're not likely to win an election, they start casting aspersions at the credibility of the elections, so that they know they're not going to win, and therefore they start wanting the person that shall win to not have credibility.
It does draw interesting parallels with Kenya, of course, and the rest of Africa. So I guess it happens. So it is a global evil.
Right. It isn't a global evil. I mean, amongst the
global
losing politicians.
I think the assumption that because you're going to lose, the elections are rigged is what is evil, because you undermine democracy.
Right. And it is on that note that we wind up tonight's discussion. Thank you so much, ladies, for your insight. Thank you for being with us. And we asked you tonight on our Twitter poll that should the IEBC commissioners be given blanket immunity as they leave office? And 32% of you have said yes. 68% have said no, they should not be given a blanket immunity. Thank you so much for your views and for sharing and for watching indeed tonight. I'm Sharon Momani. Have a good evening.